Hello, welcome to the sideboard here at the SCGINVI.com Season 1 Invitational in Roanoke, part of the SCG Tour brought to you by Ultimate Guard. I'm Nick Miller alongside streamer, known personality, and brewer Jeff Hoogland. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Nick.
It's good to have you here. It's been a little while, but the streaming has allowed you to come on out to the Invitational here in Roanoke.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. My stream funded my trip here. Thanks to all those people online. We've got two really sweet decks, and we're here to talk about the Modern one today.
Right. When we think Modern, I think of you, so we're definitely going to touch on the Modern deck. And you're playing a deck you've been tweeting about, kind of talking about on social media, this Esper Goryo's kind of gifts Reanimator shell.
Yep. So this is a deck that I actually worked on a little bit at the end of 2015, but at that point it had some really bad matchups in the format because it was really missing some kind of critical tools, and new cards that have been printed since then, such as Collective Brutality and Fatal Push, have really given this deck that extra edge and push over the top it needs to really be competitive.
Right, we've seen kind of the gifts engine exist for quite a while in Modern, but now this shell has kind of all of the tools. These late sets have given you all kinds of things. You mentioned Fatal Push, but even something simple as Jace Vryn's Prodigy wasn't here, not too long ago.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing that cards like Collective Brutality and Jace Vryn's Prodigy do for a deck like this is these decks are notoriously clunky. You've got a lot of 5, 6, and even 9 mana spells in our deck, and Collective Brutality lets us generate tempo by discarding one of those expensive cards and kind of generating a 2-spell turn on turns 2 or 3 when we really need to stay in the game.
Right. So what we have here is sort of a control shell, but has a combo finish almost.
Yeah, every deck to kind of be competitive in Modern, you kind of have to have like some really busted angle that you're attacking from to stay competitive, and this deck has a lot of really cheap, efficient interaction that we talked about a little bit, plus it has the Gifts Ungiven into Unburial Rites, plus a Fatty of our choice to kind of lock people out of the game early.
All right, and you got some good ones. We'll touch on that here in a minute, because there's one I definitely want to talk about.
Yep.
But let's go over the interaction. As you said, we have kind of just the who's of 1-mana spells in this format for your colors. Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Path, Fatal Push, Serum Visions, all here, all do exactly what you need to be doing in the early game.
Yeah, definitely. It allows us to be interactive with the decks that are a little bit faster than us, and against the decks that aren't faster than us, the discard lets us pick apart their hand and kind of take their answers to our things.
Then you get all the value again between Jace and Snapcaster Mage, so you're kind of reusing all the cards as much as you need.
Yep, I forgot how much fun Jace Vryn's Prodigy was to play with back when it was in Standard, and it's very powerful in this deck with all of our 1-mana spells and how quickly you flip it over and start plussing and minusing.
Right, any format where you can use fetch lands plus the just 1-mana efficient spells, you're going to be able to flip it quickly, trigger Revolt when it transforms, which is kind of a cool little interaction that's running around in this deck.
Yep.
And then you have Lingering Souls, just tying it all together as the value kind of control parts.
Yeah, it's another card that can allow us to clock our opponent and pressure them. It's another card that gives value with Collective Brutality and Jace looting, so just super flexible Modern All-Star Souls.
All right, so we have all of that. Now we need to talk about the fun part. So now we have Gifts Ungiven, Goryo's Vengeance, and then your big creature suite to go along with Unburial Rites. Elishnor and Iona, we kind of expect those out of the gifts package.
Yep.
But now we have Obzedat, 3 copies of this card. Brian Braun-Duin would be very pleased.
So Obzedat, I mentioned that you always want to be doing something kind of powerful and busted in Modern, and Obzedat alongside Goryo's Vengeance gives us another angle to be doing a really powerful thing. A common line that you have in this deck is turn 2 Collective Brutality, kill their turn 2 play, discard your Obzedat and check their hand for removal, and then on your turn 3, you Goryo's Vengeance the Obzedat back into play. And the way Magic works, you choose how the triggers stack at your end of turn. So if you resolve Obzedat triggers before Goryo's, Obzedat exiles himself and then he'll come back next turn.
Right. Can't get rid of it once it starts going into the exile zone, except for one matchup where you just played this round, Wasteland Strangler.
I played against the Wasteland Stranglers. Haven't played against that one we were testing online, and it lines up awkwardly well against the Ghost Dad.
So it takes out your Obzedat even after you've done all the trickery, putting it into play, exiling it to itself.
Yep.
They can still get it and knock it out of exile.
Yeah. The really nice thing Obzedat does for a deck like this is control shells like this traditionally have very bad matchups against decks like Tron and the big mana decks, and the fact that we can flip an Obzedat into play as early as the 3rd turn buffers our life total and just races very quickly and says you have to execute your game plan or we're going to kill you very quickly.
Yeah. Not to mention against those decks, they're kind of relying on Ugin,
and
Karn, things like that to deal with your creature. Obzedat's just going to say goodbye, come back later.
Yep. I had a game online the other day where my opponent threw the Breach to Emrakul while Obzedat was gone, put us to 1, and then Obzedat came back into play and killed them the next turn.
That's pretty sweet. And what are go over some of the other lines of play, especially with gifts, and the kind of the lines you take against the different matchups, and what exactly your game plan is against control, aggro, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why this deck is very powerful is that in addition to gifts generating free wins with just some burial rights plus one of our fatties of choice, we can also do value gifts piles that just like bury our mid-range and control opponents in card advantage. One of the really common piles is you get a Goryo's Vengeance and a Jace Fringe Prodigy and a Snapcaster Mage and an Obsidat, and then they're forced to give you the Jace and the Obsidat because the Snapcaster Mage and the Goryo would get back the Jace and the Obsidat.
Right.
You'll notice we have splits between some of the removal in this card, like there's one Thoughtseize. That's so, for instance, against a combo deck, you could cast Gifts Ungiven and get Inquisition, Thoughtseize, Collective Brutality, and Snapcaster Mage, basically gifting for 4 interactive spells to disrupt them.
That's very powerful, being able to kind of split and make sure you get what you need. Other things going on in here, I want to mention, most of these Reanimator decks you see that are kind of really trying to do busted things can't cast their threats.
Yeah.
Obsidat, very castable in this deck.
Yeah, the question that I got a lot is, how is this deck in a field where people are preparing for Dredge? And the answer to that question is, a lot of that Dredge hate is coming post-board, and post-board we can just trim on our graveyard interactive things and just like cast 5 mana Obsidats. And like, honestly, we're a control deck, casting 7 mana Elishorn isn't completely unreasonable.
Right, sort of the living end strategy of, all right, I'm just going to start casting these giant creatures, and eventually I'm going to win that way.
And Obsidat's a little better than the draft leavings that they have to cast.
Hey, they got a lot of help out of Amonkhet.
That's true,
So, all right, so we'll move on to the sideboard here, where you have a lot of kind of the who's who's of Modern. Because you have white in your deck, you get access to all the good stuff. Stony Silence here. We saw Affinity have a great weekend in Vegas at the Grand Prix.
Yeah, and it's not even just Affinity with that card. That card Splash hates Tron, which in conjunction with our Fast Clock with Obsidat is often enough to steal that matchup without any land destruction. Stony Silence is also pretty funny. A lot of the Aether Vial decks are playing Relic of Progenitus as their graveyard hate of choice, so you can bring in 2 copies of Stony Silence against them and turn off their Vials and their Relics. And against the Hate Bears deck that finished in the finals of the Grand Prix, it turns off their clues too from their Thraben Inspectors.
Oh man, I need to see that interaction on camera at least once. Shutting down clues, that's some good, that's some extra value there.
Yeah.
As a man who likes his value, you got that. Now, Detention Sphere and Supreme Verdict, these are the Return to Ravnica All-Stars showing up. You wanted to mention why you have 3 Supreme Verdicts instead of a Wrath package that you could gifts with.
Yeah, so in a lot of the matchups where you would want to, say, cast Gifts Ungiven for Supreme Verdict, Wrath of God, and Damnation, a lot of the times just casting gifts for the Elishorn and the Unburial Race is enough to be a sweeper in that matchup. And the Supreme Verdicts are very important to not be counterable against decks like Grixis Shadow and Merfolk, where they're pressuring you but also have disruption in the form of counterspells.
Then you have a bunch of other things running around. You have your 4 counterspell suite between Negate, Dispel, Countersquall, Disdainful Stroke. You got everything covered there.
Odysseus Command's a counterspell too, Nick.
True. We were going to get to that, because now we've seen Colligan's Command be very big in the Grixis Shadow deck. I've been waiting for this one because Snapcaster Mage exists. Ojutai's Command's very good.
And it's even better with Jace Fringe Prodigy, because you don't have to, like, Ojutai's Command back Snapcaster is kind of clunky and expensive, right? Ojutai's Command, you can get back your Jace on turn 4 and then untap and use it the following turn right away.
And then 1 Disenchant running around in here as well, kind of goes with your need to hit big enchantments, artifacts.
Yeah, it's a good out to Blood Moon as well, which is kind of annoying for our 3-color mana base.
Okay, so where would you say this deck kind of stacks up? I know you were pretty happy about it. You talked to me before the tournament. Of all the decks I've registered in big Modern events, this one might be the best.
Yeah, definitely. And just like, this deck is playing just most of the spells that are like reasonable in Modern, like we said, right? Like Inquisition, Thoughtseize, Path to Exile, Fatal Push. Like the cards you're choosing to kill your opponent with after those are usually you can mix and match. And what this deck is mixing and matching with is attacking from an angle that a lot of people aren't prepared to fight on, and it gives you a lot of axes to combat them even if they are prepared to interact with your graveyard.
All right, so last question. Grixis Shadow is the deck of the format right now.
Yep.
How does this match up with that?
I think this deck lines up really well against them. Between our, we have 6 pieces of efficient 1-mana removal to interact with all of their things, and then the 3 copies of Supreme Verdict, and even Detention Sphere post-board to clean up multiple shadows or multiple anglers and things like that.
All right, well, the deck looks great. We're glad to have you here playing in Roanoke for once, the Invitational. You've been here for Players' Championship before, but now we've got $20,000 for first place on the line. I'm sure you're eyeing that.
Yep. Biggest prize pool of an SCG tournament ever, right?
All right, we're glad to have you here, Jeff. Thanks for joining me here in the sideboard. Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all weekend long for the action here in Roanoke.